I think this question kind of encompasses my entire training philosophy. If you would, I'm training dogs. I do encourage people to train things like tricks because it removes the expectation. I guess educate people that they need to build their foundations first before I'd even think about bothering with the dogs because the actual relationship isn't there yet.
Jamie the dog trainer has built a strong following online by sharing his philosophy of trick and movement-based training, a style that has led to shows and seminars all across Australia. He's known for creating clear, practical tutorials that help dog owners teach new skills and strengthen their dog's training right at home. I consider myself also a science-based trainer with a balanced approach. In practical terms, what does science-based dog training mean to you? How does that philosophy show up in your day-to-day training?
I want my dogs to have zero inhibitions around me when I'm working. So what I mean by that is that I don't want my dog to feel like they can't push the lure as rude as they want, right? So I was actually a professional triathlete. I was in the Australian Institute of Sport. I lived over in Europe for probably not 6 months, but sort of 4 months of the year and did races around there.
You talk a lot about owners need to adjust their own mindset. What's one mental shift that can instantly make training go smoother for both the human and the dog?
Yeah, I think this question kind of encompasses my entire training philosophy, if you wish. So when I'm training dogs, I do encourage people to train things like tricks because it removes the expectation. So when people are training obedience, there's always an expectation there in that, people want their dog to downstay. And if the dog's not letting her downstay, there's that conflict between dog and handler, even if it's just subtle. Whereas if you get someone to work on having fun with their dog and teaching tricks and all that sort of stuff, there's no expectation there. If the dog isn't learning the trick, it's not really a big problem. And then it opens up a big mindset shift because we have a dog and handler that are working together. There's no expectation. The dog frees up. We get engagement. We get dog learning new things. So that also reinforces the handler because they're like, we're getting somewhere. And then we can start to incorporate that mindset shift into other parts of the training as well. So it's a big reason why I incorporate tricks. The other reason I incorporate tricks as well, we can sort of touch on. But it is one of the big reasons that I can shift that mindset. And then suddenly we've got a dog and handler working as a team. There's no conflict in the training. And then if there's no conflict in that training or minimal, we then start to get a lot more engagement and their relationship improves.
So the mindset shift is more about having fun with the dogs instead of having these strict, structured goals that can sometimes create frustration when the goals aren't being met. And once people start having fun with their dogs, then a lot of doors start to open up. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. So one of the big things when it comes to my training is that I don't like conflict within that training session. So what I mean by that is, say you're asking your dog to heel or whatever, and the dog, is wanting to be somewhere else. They're engaged with a smell or a dog or something like that. There's a little bit of conflict there because you're asking the dog to heel and the dog's like, I don't want to be there. They want to be over there. If we sort of change that mindset, we're doing tricks and all that sort of stuff, everyone loosens up. So if we're sort of constantly adding that structure into training, you get conflict and then we start to get other behaviors like, displacement where the dog's like sniffing and we're like, well, why is the dog checking out? Well, because there's a lot of conflict in that training session. So I try and build up dogs initially through a lot of tricks, fast-paced obedience. I allow my dogs to check out initially, which is a bit of a controversial sort of take. A lot of people don't like that, but sort of what I do. And then I sort of build in the structure later on.
And if you're training with a new client, if you're doing in-person lessons, what's the first thing that you start with when you're working with them?
A lot of the time I'll start with the basics. So I'm big on foundations. I think, where a lot of people's, training goals fall down or fall apart is usually because the dog's lacking foundation. So they try and build up too quick. They're trying to work on reactivity or whatever. And the foundations aren't there. The dog doesn't have a solid understanding of their marker, or the dog doesn't really have a great relationship with the handler, or doesn't know how to play, for example, or doesn't know the general training philosophy. And then, we're trying to work a dog around other dogs that they're reactive to or something, and the whole thing falls apart. So for me, foundations, so I build up I'm big on making sure the dog has a really strong emotional response to the marker, which I think is really common among trainers these days. I'm big on play. I do a lot of food games and all that sort of stuff to build drive and engagement. And then once I've got that, then I'll sort of use that as a building block from there.
And so you're doing that even if somebody just wants very basic obedience, or maybe they have one behavioral issue. The dog started to become one of the most common reactive on leash. So they call you up and they say, my dog's being reactive. Help me out.
Yeah, like obviously there's going to be some nuance. Sometimes you'll get like you might work a greyhound that's a bit lower drive, and obviously I'll tweak that because we're not going to, turn the dog into a Mal. But yeah, generally I'll start at similar, always build a marker with all the dogs. Depending on the dog, I might sort of, tweak the drive building exercises and food games and stuff to suit if the dog's a little bit lower drive. Some dogs as well, you're better off keeping it even simpler and just really basic markers, making sure the dog understands that, and that might be part of building foundations. But if I can, I really want to build a dog that's fully committed to the handler, and we can sort of start to go from there.
And how do you start building most of the first behaviors that you start teaching? Are you using primarily food lures? Are you doing spatial pressure at all, or free shaping? What sort of techniques do you like to implement in the beginning?
Yeah. So a lot of the time, actually, if I can, if the dog's got that in them, I'll try and use a lot of praise. So with the food, so I sort of see food. People think if we mark and give the dog a bit of food, the dog's working for the food. But you can make it a lot more than that. You can turn it into a reward event where it's not just the food the dog's working for. We can throw the food in the air and get the dog to catch, or we can get the dog to chase the food. So you're basically turning that piece of food into a ball, if you wish, or you're turning it into a bit of prey. So, and then you might also, one big thing I think that's sort of lost in dog training a little bit is the emotional component to dog training. I'm really big on using my voice. My dogs really feed off that feedback, and obviously I've got to fade that out when I'm competing. But adding in to the reward that you giving them feedback, so and reassurance. So mark, I throw the treat in the air, the dog catches it, and at the same time I'm letting them know that I'm proud of them. I think it becomes a bit of a reward event. The dog gets that voice, verbal feedback. They get the praying of food. They get the food itself. So then when you start to fade out food and things like that for competition or whatever your goals are, you're not fading out the entirety of that reward event. So there's only the food component. The rest of it's still there. You can still add your voice. You can still, get your dog to bounce up to the hand, which I'll do a lot of the time in a competition where I'm allowed to do an ANKC exercise over, and the dog bounces up to my hand. There's no food in my hand, but the dog still sees that component of the reward. So I'm big on sort of adding in, I guess, as much as I can into that reward event so that the dog sees value in it.
I like that that term is becoming more widely used, the reward event. First time I heard it, it was from Michael Ellis. I was watching one of his online seminars, and I thought that's great that he's calling it a reward event, because I noticed, especially early in my career, so many trainers would get caught on the fact that we have only a couple seconds to influence a dog's behavior. So I would have trainers that would mark a behavior, and then they're instantly trying to reward the dog as fast as they would need to mark it. And I'm saying, like, what are you using a marker for if you're trying to throw the reward at the dog the exact moment that they do it? Now, of course, the dog getting the primary the moment they do a behavior is always best, but we use markers to bridge that gap, of course, between the behavior and the consequence, pinpoint fine details in the training. But I think it helps get people to understand it's like, okay, yeah, we need to mark the behavior saying yes or good or whatever it is. And then we can have fun with the reward event. It could be a few seconds. It could be, like you said, praising, tossing treats, bringing out a toy. So I like that that's becoming more widely used and it's becoming more popular, because I think it does shift the way people look at the rewards. Now, you also mentioned praise. How do you use praise? You use it strategically, or just when you want to let your dog know you're happy with something, or is it something that you incorporate into your training as strategic as you would a marker?
Yeah. So my praise, I tend to have a whole heap of different, ways that I'll praise a dog. So if they've done something really good, they'll see me really, use a lot of praise. But there's sort of levels to it as well. So I might even while I'm doing heel work to keep the dog's energy up, there's some more lighter praise there to keep them going. I'll even use different sounds for rhythm as well when I'm doing heel work and to keep them up. So sounds kind of silly, but when I'm healing, a lot of the time I'll go and pair that with with his heel work, so it pumps the dog up. So a lot of the time I'm using a lot of that praise very strategically to then layer it into my obedience and use it when I need. I'll also use it a little bit in reactivity stuff as well. So if I've got a dog and I've built that into my foundations, and I've got a dog that's looking at a trigger, I can add in some light reassurance in my voice, and you often can trigger a disengagement, which I then have the opportunity to reward as well. So I do use praise a lot. A big trainer actually to that's big on praise is actually Mia Skogster. I've been her membership
Yep.
for a while, and she's big on using a lot of different voice tones and all that sort of stuff when she's training her dogs. So that's where I sort of got a lot of that inspiration from. And I think you mentioned Mike Ellis before. One of the big things I got from him is that the concept of a jackpot rewards, especially when it comes to reward events, he isn't big on, I think, number of treats, but more the duration of the jackpot. So making sure
Yes.
the actual event is increased in duration rather than worrying about how many you're actually giving the dog as such. So which is really interesting.
Exactly right. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a bit fished about there with that one, but it's an interesting concept which has sort of changed because before that I was very much jackpot, you give them one reward,
Mhm.
normal reward you might give them one reward, and then when you're jackpotting you might give them two or three, but instead now I've changed a lot of that over the last couple of years where my jackpots will be extending the reward event as such. So if a dog does something really good, I might have a 30-second celebration instead of just giving them 4 or 5 treats and going that's a jackpot.
Right. Yeah, and what Michael Ellis says, he talks about quality, quantity, and dynamics when it comes to food delivery and making the reward event more worthwhile. So, yeah, instead of just giving them a handful, he says maybe step back, have the dog move for the food, give them a piece in the right hand, and maybe even toss a piece for the dog to run and get after it. And so, even though the dog got 4 pieces, which you could have gave a handful and given the dog 10 pieces, the 4 pieces was more valuable for most dogs just based on the way that it was delivered. I think it's really good that you brought that up too. Now, for praise and talking to the dogs, what are some things that someone who's new, just getting into dog training, can start implementing, at least in a strategic way, so they're thinking about the sort of praise and vocal communication they're having with their dog aside from markers? Maybe little techniques that they can start implementing to see a little bit of a change in the dog's behavior, or maybe the results that they're getting through obedience?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the big things I notice a lot of the time with when you sort of get people to use praise is that they get a bit frantic a lot of the time, and it becomes sort of fast paced and the energy's off. So I think a lot of it's just about try and add in your praise to initially to exercises that how to do really well, like second nature to you. Because if you're concentrating on delivering your marker and you're teaching something new and adding praise in, it can get all
Mm.
overwhelming. So a lot of the time, do some basics. Even ask the dog to sit, and then as the dog's holding the sit, good, mark, and then reward, and then add in your praise after that. And it's going to be helpful, and work on calm, I guess, positive praise rather than that frantic sort of energy that people can give off sometimes when they're trying to give the dog feedback and the dog checks out because they're like, no, I can't, I don't want to be part of that. And they're like, it's too much. So this best thing is probably sometimes make sure that you are being vocal, but don't overdo it. So making sure that
That's
it's
a
calm.
good point too. Adjusting for the situation. Yeah, if you're working a stay and you're trying to build duration, getting really excited may not be the best, especially in the beginning, unless you're trying to proof the dog. You're trying to add some more distractions to make it more difficult. But yes, that's a very, very good point. Adjust it according to what the dog's doing and what you want them to be doing, or how you want them to be performing based on that praise. And I'm kind of curious, every expert has an origin story. What originally sparked your passion for dog training? Was there a particular dog or mentor early on that made you realize this is what I'm meant to do? I'd really love to hear about that moment young Jamie decided to become Jamie the dog trainer.
It's actually really random. I don't know if you know what I did before dog training, but I was actually a professional triathlete for years. So I was in the Australian Institute of Sport. I lived over in Europe for probably not 6 months, but sort of 4 months of the year, and did races around there. I was just missed out on London Olympics in 2012, actually. So I was in the shadow squad there for Australia, and I come back home after that, and I was a little bit burnt out. Um, and that was where I partnered Bianca. And not long after that, when I was in Geelong near Ballarat, and we I sort of I was contemplating what to do with my career and my life effectively, and we ended up getting a dog. And look, it's probably it wasn't the best. Obviously now I recommend people, do their research when they're buying dogs, and they
Right.
get them, registered, reputable breeders who, genetically do genetic testing and hip scores and all that sort of stuff and health testing. But I picked up Neo actually from this in the middle of nowhere on a farm for $180. So it's just a border collie on a farm. And so it probably wasn't the greatest idea for my sort of first dog. We had a lot of family dogs in between, and my whole sort of personality, I've always been interested in dogs and all that sort of stuff. But with triathlon, my whole personality is I'm very, once I get hooked on something or interested in something, I'm pretty determined. So I sort of stay on the path, and I'm a little bit, I guess some would say, a bit OCD, a bit obsessive. So it sort of becomes my whole life. So I very quickly got sucked into dogs and the training component of things. And this was in 2012. And I joined my local obedience club. So, and I was initially just a student there, actually training for trials and all that sort of stuff. And I wanted to become an instructor. So I let them know, and they took me on as an apprentice instructor, I guess, if you like. And just before I keep going on too, if anyone's out there wanting to become a dog trainer, seeing your local obedience club is probably, one of the best things you can do. It's all they're all volunteer ran. They are in Australia anyway. I'm not sure about overseas, but if you have an interest in dogs and you say, hey, I want to become an instructor, most clubs are really, singing out for instructors because it's volunteer. It requires a bit of time. And if they can get someone who's really interested in becoming an instructor, it's a great opportunity. A lot of clubs will jump at that opportunity. So contact them. So I sort of, become an instructor there and was mentored by some really good handlers, dog handlers. And you'll probably see it's where a lot of my style comes from. Their names were Kylie and Heather, and they were both into ANKC obedience, but they're into a lot of agility, tricks, and dancing with dogs, so, which is where sort of a lot of my stuff comes from. So I used to go with them to tricks class on Thursday nights at the local club, and I used to learn how to do dog tricks. Was sort of one of the first things that I did. And they had other little extracurricular training sessions I used to go to at Bunnings here, which is like a hardware store at the Bunnings car park of a night, and we used to do all different tricks and teach other dogs to pivot on pivot boxes and pivot and all that sort of stuff. So I sort of grew up doing a lot of movement-based stuff with dogs first. And my sort of career sort of went from there. I eventually, I was there for a couple of years sort of instructing. And then I, applied for a job actually at a local pet store, Petstock, which is a big sort of chain here, and to become a puppy school trainer. They opened up this new store in Ballarat, and I sort of was lucky because Petstock originated in Ballarat, so the head office is here. I was training there for a few years, doing puppy schools and stuff, and I'd done a little bit of study, doing a diploma in the meantime, and with some relevant dog training stuff, and then I got asked to do some course. They needed someone to basically redesign some courses, and by that stage, I've been doing stuff for 3 or 4 years or something, and I was pretty much the only trainer with Petstock in Ballarat at that stage, and I was very lucky that the head office was there, so it made sense to put me on, and I started working with people there and doing course content and all that sort of stuff, and then in 2015 I sort of went out on my own, and then started Southern Cross Canine, and I've been training. I guess I'd say for 12 or 13 years, as far as training dogs, sort of probably doing consults and one-on-one stuff, maybe 10 years. But I sort of just fell on my feet. I didn't really, even during that time when I was doing dog training, I was doing a university course. I was doing applied science, and my main sort of major in that was environmental stuff. So I was doing, a lot of environmental management, hydrology and geology and all that sort of stuff. And learning about fire ecology and all that sort of stuff. And my main interest there was a lot of different animal stuff. So I was into birds actually. Got a tattoo with Australian birds on me, and it sort of went from there. Then obviously I graduated my degree, and by that stage I was sort of already almost full time into dog training. So I'd never used the rest of my degree and kept training dogs. So that's sort of.
And what kind of obedience club was it?
ANKC, so their main stuff there. Look, they do all ANKC sports. Hang
So
on.
were you doing like novice, open, those types of routines? Did you say AKC or you said?
Yeah, so they do all ANKC sports. So I think in the States you call it AKC. It's
Mhm.
ANKC here. So it's slightly different abbreviation, but similar stuff. So they do like ANKC obedience, rally, dancing with dogs, tricks, flyball, all that sort of stuff, agility. So any sport that you can think of that's ANKC or AKC affiliated, they do that. So even now they've got so many different sports now. There's sprint dog here in Australia. I don't know if it's over there, which is like basically the equivalent of 100-meter sprint for dogs,
Mhm.
and rat G trials and all sorts of things. So
The advice that you were given for people that want to become professional dog trainers, I think is spot on, especially if someone doesn't have a massive budget to go to a school and spend ten to $20,000. Plus, if they're living expenses, dogs, finding a local club, whether it's AKC obedience, even doing some of the other ones like scent training clubs, all these things are going to help someone start to understand and learn more about dogs. And I think all the disciplines within the world of dogs is an excellent way to continue to grow as an overall trainer. Same thing with, the protection clubs. As someone, you could just look online. I'm pretty sure it's the same with AKC. You can look to see what clubs are local. Same thing with all the protection clubs. So like IGP, PSA, Mondio Ring, French Ring, go right to their website, find the local clubs, contact the main contact for the club. And most of them are really friendly, really nice. You want to train, come on down, bring your dog. You want to get in a bite suit, we'll teach you how to do that as well. So I think that's really excellent advice for someone who wants to get started. Not only is it great, but it is way more cost effective than some of the other options. If you can go to a school, definitely go to a school. That's also an excellent way, but the clubs are awesome. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And I also know that your social media really started to blow up during the COVID lockdowns. Did you remember the moment or a video when you realized you started to go viral and were reaching hundreds and thousands of people? What was it like for you to suddenly have an international audience tuning in? And how did that sudden exposure change things for you personally or professionally?
yeah. I've got a pretty long answer for this one. I've got a basically what happened was COVID here in Australia, and again, I'm not sure how it sort of impacted the states or elsewhere. But in Australia, there was a lot of lockdowns, so basically where you couldn't leave your house for long periods of time, and obviously dog training, your business is very one-on-one, and you're working with people, so it sort of impacted dog trainers quite a bit. So the one way that you could pivot the business was sort of to go online, and I'd sort of done a little bit online over the years, but more for my local company, whereas posting that I run, and I was sort of posting locally on there. But I didn't really know what I was doing, and I put up an advertisement on my training page, on my company training page, and I said, "Oh, I'm after a videographer as well as after someone to help me film because I didn't really know how to edit videos, things like that." And I got a few applications from different videographer people and all that sort of stuff. I got an application from this one girl named Tara, and she has, you can actually have a look at her YouTube channel, it's Tara Farms. So she does like farming vlogs, and she messaged me and goes, "I can help you." And so she wasn't a classic videographer. She was basically a YouTube creator and TikTok. She's got like 750,000 followers on TikTok and I don't know, 400, 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. And she's really cool. And she messaged me and said, "I can help you out." And I said, "Look, I'm just after someone to help me film and give me some tips and pointers on how to edit and all that sort of stuff." And she's like, "Oh, it's really easy. You can even do it on your phone now." So I started recording a few videos on my phone, and she sort of helped me out. And, I started, because previously I was doing videos where I was like, "Hey, it's Jamie the dog trainer speaking," or whatever, and Tara was like, "Get rid of that. Like, just get straight into it. People don't want to, like, you got 3 seconds to get them hooked and all that sort of stuff. And if you wanted to pivot your business that way, it's sort of the way to go." And she helped me out initially with a lot of videos and all that sort of stuff. And I sort of come up with ideas, and she helped me out with, how she thinks I should work them. And I was posting videos, and I posted one video actually. It was about this is, you probably asked the point at which it sort of started to go a bit crazy. I posted a video about, I was walking my dog and a dog approaches off leash. It was just a little skit where, to a song. And, it was basically about dogs that lunge at, come up to dogs when they're on leash walking and rushing dogs, and people say, "Oh, look, it's okay, he's friendly."
Yep.
And that's before that, I'd had like a few thousand views or something on my socials, and this one had like a million after a day, and I was like, "Oh, geez, that's pretty wild." And then I just kept posting, and I think the big thing is just consistency. And yeah, Tara helped me a lot. I sort of owe a lot of that help from her. But I think probably the messages I want to get across as well is that probably the biggest thing is just getting out there and starting. Because I found out after a while that I was probably just a bit scared to start, and all you need is an iPhone and to edit your videos. And probably the biggest thing is cut out all the fluff and make sure that you don't need to say, "Hey, it's Jamie the dog trainer here." People already know. Just get in and offer them the value on what you're offering. Offer them straight away what you're telling them, rather than YouTube's a bit different because it's all like long form content, but if you're doing short form stuff on Instagram and stuff, you want to get straight to the point type of thing. But sort of I got that going. And then what was the other part of your question? I think it was
Yeah. How did it impact your career
yeah.
as a dog trainer professionally?
Yeah, massively. I've had so many opportunities since, for example, there's a dog lovers festival in Australia. I've done Melbourne last year and performed in front of, had my dogs up on stage, performing in front of, thousands of people. And I went to Sydney last month and was able to do that. They got me back again. I'm back in there, back in the Melbourne Dog Lovers show this weekend. And, when I first signed up to it, I was like, oh, geez, I've never competed, I've never competed in front of that many people, let alone jumped up on stage and hoped my dogs do the right thing. And, I went up there and did it, and my dogs, they did amazingly. And it was it was validating for me and my training as well, that I can go up and do all that sort of stuff. But the opportunities that have sort of come from that have been amazing. We've had, companies that I've really enjoyed working with that, align with my values. I've been able to do seminars, which, to me is wild. It's you have a bit of imposter syndrome a little bit, because my first seminar I did in Perth, Alex Deasy, I owe her a massive thank you. She was the first one to message and go, "Hey, I'd like to host you for a seminar." And I said, I don't know whether I should be running seminars yet. I don't know if I've sort of earned that privilege. And she goes, "No, your training's amazing. We want to see it." And I did a seminar there, and that sort of prompted other people to get in contact as well and go, "Hey, we want to host you for a seminar." So it sort of required that first person to go, "Hey, we really love your stuff." So yeah, the opportunities that sort of come have been, amazing. I couldn't have imagined that would have been the case, as far as, from just posting on social media. So, I encourage people to get out there, and the big thing is, some videos that I post, I'm like, it's not a perfect video. There's some stuff in there that I look back at it and I'm like, hey, like, I preferred to have done this handling or this mechanics, or I've looked back at it and gone, there's some errors in there and all that sort of stuff. But you've just got to post imperfect stuff as well. So, because it is authentic too, if you're not posting just constantly stuff that's, 100% perfect. And
right.
Yeah.
And having this reputation that continues to grow, do you feel like you have more pressure placed on you now, especially if you go compete, more eyes are watching you, more eyes are curious to see how you're going to perform when you compete? Do you feel that pressure, or does it not bother you at all?
A little bit. Look, if I'm probably honest, the last probably couple of years I haven't competed as much as probably what I was. So, look, it is a lot. You sort of go to, local obedience, trial and things like that. And I think people, expect your dogs to be perfect. And they probably don't expect that. It's probably the expectations that I put on myself, because like, oh, he's,
Right.
but it's the followers on Facebook and Instagram and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, look, I think everyone's always been very supportive. Like, ever since I've still been going to trials, and my dogs still NQ sometimes. That's sort of life that happens. You fail trials, and we move on and go to the next one. But I mean, it is a little bit more like, I've had a couple of times where in Melbourne, there's a really lovely judge that actually messaged me and asked to do some consults with me, and she was randomly judging me when I come out to do a trial a couple of months later. And that was I was like, oh, I kind of felt a bit of pressure there, because I'm like, she wants to do consults with me, but also I've got to perform here. But that's all part of it. I think once you put the expectations aside, you've just got to get out there and go for it, because realistically, I don't think people are judging you despite the fact that, I sometimes feel that way. I don't think that's the reality. I think most people are very supportive. So
Right. And, if you do make a mistake, I think people often see that as reassuring that the expert dog trainer is not always perfect and it's okay if a dog makes a mistake. And then when the dog does make a mistake, seeing how you deal with it in the moment. And that's something that I often tell my students when I'm watching them and how they're working with their dog. I say, I'm not worried about what your dog is doing. I'm watching you. I want to see how you're reacting based on what the dog is doing. Now, of course, I'm watching the dog as well. But if I'm critiquing and judging, I'm judging the student on how they handle it when the dog makes a mistake, or if the dog doesn't understand what they're trying to get them to do. How do they adjust? Which makes me think about the fact that you're often described as a science-based trainer, which I resonate with that quite a bit. I consider myself also a science-based trainer with a balanced approach. In practical terms, what does science-based dog training mean to you? How does that philosophy show up in your day-to-day training? For example, when a dog isn't responding to a method, or you're just not getting the results you want, how do principles of science guide your next step?
yeah, so for me, I think the first thing I always mention this in the 5 or 6 seminars that I have done, um, which is not that many in the scheme of things, but I think what I always mention at the start when I'm first starting a seminar is that if I can't explain why I'm doing something, don't listen to it, right? So, the first thing for me for it to be, I guess science based is that you need to be able to explain why it works. Me saying I don't know why it works, but it does, is probably not science based. Although there is probably a few things that I do. I'm like I don't know why it works, but it does. But typically, you want to be able to explain why things happen. The other thing is that I want it to be somewhat what's the word centered around, I guess. Uh, you know, I guess the science of behavior as far as, when you're working with, as far as Skinner's box or, classic conditioning, we've got operant conditioning and all that sort of stuff. I try and base a lot of my, I guess, training around that. But I guess there's also the thing too is, try and get out of Skinner's box as far as, people can also lean on it too much and
Mhm.
suddenly all our training becomes really methodical and there's no art in it. So for me, the other part of, I guess, it being science-based is that I also want to, I guess, objectively assess my training. So if I, so I often offer bundles for consults. So, people pay for 4 sessions. And look, if we're at session 2 and people are doing their homework and we've done all that sort of stuff and the dog's not improving, I don't want to keep doing the same thing and expect different results. So, being able to also objectively assess my training and go, hey, is this improving? If it's not, why isn't it? And then changing it. So, and sometimes people ask me, how do I fix this? And my answer is I don't know, because it's not because I don't have any ideas of what to do, but sometimes dogs don't perform exactly how the textbook says it should. So, us says they should. So, we've got to be flexible as well. It can't just be, this is what happens when I say sit and we give the dog a treat and suddenly the dog's going to sit, because not all, just because we give dogs some food doesn't mean it's acting as positive reinforcement. So, things like, objectively assessing your training and being, reflective on why a dog isn't improving, I think is really important, because if we don't do that, we just keep doing the same thing and we're expecting different results. It's not a smart way to train. So that's sort of where I guess I come from with that sort of
And what
thing.
are some of the most important science-based principles that you teach your average pet clients?
Yeah, yeah. Look, and there's always a balance. Sometimes I get clients that are really interested in the science of it, and
Mhm.
you can explain it, and people are actually interested. I think it's probably a bit of nuance. Sometimes I get clients that really just are interested in, what do I do with my dog? I don't really want to know about the science behind it. But if someone's interested, I think probably the big thing is being aware of the difference between I guess respondent learning or classical learning, and then also looking at operant stuff. So operant conditioning as far as their behaviors you can see, and then respondent learning, emotions, things you can't see. So and how they're both intertwined at all times and how they link together. Because sometimes if you're working with counter conditioning, for example, people are sort of like, oh, why are we rewarding the dog for looking at the trigger or whatever, and trying to being able to explain that concisely so people understand that message has got across, so they buy into it, is important.
Mhm.
Because if they're not buying into what you're selling, then they're I guess the results aren't going to be as good.
Oh, you're right. They're not going to do it if they're
Exactly.
not buying into it, right? And if you can't explain it, I think you were talking about, what was that, the LAT technique? Look at that.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and that works great too. And it's one of the things that when I first learned about that technique, I questioned it as well. Like, we're rewarding the dog for looking at the trigger. And I've seen different ways of people doing this. One, the dog sees the trigger before the dog reacts, they mark it, the dog turns around and gets the reward. And then the other version I've seen is the dog sees the trigger, they redirect the dog's focus on themselves, then they mark and reward. And with both of those, I've seen pretty much the same, very similar results. The dog
Mm.
will actively look for the trigger and then look at the human and say, pay me. Which,
Yep.
yes, sure, the dog's looking for the trigger at this point, but what the dog is doing after it sees the trigger is significantly different. So we're
Yep.
starting to see results. And then, just like you said, if you are using a technique or a method and you're not getting the results, well, you at least know you're following the science. And that's why there's so many different techniques, because not every technique will work on every dog. And this is something I tell the dog trainers that I mentor as well. I say, we need to learn as professional trainers as many techniques as possible. So when we're in a situation and our main go-to isn't working, we have other things that we can shift to. An example that I use for clients is the very basic yelping when a puppy bites you, or the cross your arms, turn, and ignore the dog that's jumping up. Both of those techniques will work on a certain percentage of dogs, but on a large percentage, those won't work depending on why the dog is doing it. So then we're looking at, is it being intrinsically motivated? Is a dog jumping up because it likes jumping up, and maybe it's a Malinois or Dutch Shepherd and it's biting at your shirt and it's having a good time? Yeah, you
Yep.
could ignore that dog all day. You're not going to get results.
Yep.
Or I love the yelping when a puppy bites, because that's a very common technique that a lot of people know about, a lot of people try. And I've even had people post it in the comments of a video like, oh, I just yelp when my puppy bites me and it works perfect, works every time. It's like, well, yeah, your frame of reference is maybe two puppies.
Yeah.
How many
Yeah.
puppies have you worked with?
You've got a
And
frame
that's,
on certainly there.
yeah. And this is also something that I teach my dog trainer students. I say, what is the most value that we bring as professional dog trainers? Well, yes, it should be the knowledge that we've accumulated over the years of training and working with dogs. But a big part of it is our frame of reference. The fact that we've worked with hundreds or thousands of dogs and we've seen it multiple times. So when you have a client come up to you and they say, Jamie, you're not going to be able to handle this dog. This dog's going to be the toughest dog you've ever worked. You have no idea. And you're sitting there going, okay. And then you see the dog and you're like, all right, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most difficult, this is maybe a 4.
Yeah.
But to them, yeah, to them, it's super difficult because they just don't have that frame of reference. Now, in your experience, what's one of the most misunderstood aspects of dog behavior or training among the general public, like your pet clients? Is there a myth or a piece of conventional wisdom that you frequently find yourself debunking for your clients or your followers? And how do you set the record straight and get people to look at their dogs differently once they know the truth?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, it happened yesterday. I had a consult yesterday, which it happened. The same thing happened, and one of the big things is actually people's reluctant to play with their dog, because they've been told
Mm,
not to. And for me, with my philosophy anyway, is play is a massive part of training. In that, if you can get a dog to play in heap of different environments, you loosen them up. They feel, dogs play when they feel safe. So
mhm,
if you can, build that play into a whole heap of different environments, you're going to make your dog pretty much, very well proofed everywhere. So you can build your relationship, you're building engagement. You can start to do so much with play as far as counter conditioning, even. So play is probably a big thing. And then I guess further on from that, like yesterday, I worked with a Kelpie that had a fair bit of drive, and it was quite frustrated, I guess, and that were told not to play tug with their dog, or
mm,
not to use the flirt pole with their dog, and all that sort of stuff. And I brought out a tug, and you could see the dog really just loved being themselves, coming out, using their genetics, and all that sort of stuff. And I guess they'd been sort of told not to do that because it can, cause aggression, or, you don't want that, you don't want that state of mind coming out. But I think being able to lean into who the dog is and giving them that outlet is going to actually allow the dog to, be under control a bit easier in other scenarios. Because a lot of the thing that I talk about is, people, when it comes to dog training, we emphasize calm all the time. So every single, we want to make sure the dog's calm when we're loose leash walking. We want to make sure the dog's calm when we're doing this. But most of the time, people have issues when the dog isn't calm. They're either in drive or they're overstimulated. So being able to work the dog in drive when they're overstimulated, or if they're, in that prey drive, or, when the dog's in high arousal type state, is a skill. So, and I think, people who do a lot of dog sports, even like IGP and stuff, understand that notion very well, because, they've got to train the dog, with incredible precision and obedience while there's a decoy out on the field and things like that. The dog in high arousal state. So, if you practice training the dog while they're in that high arousal state, then when it happens in public or in real time, the dog's got some control. Whereas people always just train the dog calm, and then when it happens, we haven't practiced for the conditions. So, play is, I think, helps a lot of that sort of stuff, because it puts them in that state. The humans often don't like, they don't like the dog being really up and about and, wanting to bite the tug, and it's sort of an arousal state that people try and avoid. But I think people should lean into it and build that control. And a lot of the time, that's perpetuated by myths, in that people think that, either A, it causes aggression, or B, having that dog in that state of mind is going to be, not beneficial for their long-term behavior. So that's sort of a big one for me.
Biologically appropriate outlets. I think that's what Michael Ellis calls it. You get nose games for the sniffers, fetch games for the retrievers, bite games for the biters. You give them what's appropriate biologically for them. And I love the fact that you're talking about play. I mean, you could tell just by looking at all the dogs that you work with. If people haven't seen your social media, just go to it and check it out. I mean, the dogs are having an absolute blast. And when dogs are having that much fun working with you, it's simple. When we think about humans, we think about ourselves. If we want to create a new habit, okay, well, let's create a positive association. The analogy I use for this is, okay, you don't like to read, but you want to be well read. You really love having your cup of coffee in the morning. Okay, in the morning when I drink my coffee, I'm going to read. I'm going to create a strong positive association. But then we can also create negative associations. If you learn something under distress, or it's just a really bad experience, you may not like whatever that thing is for the rest of your life. But then when we start working with dogs, we have to be rigid, and we have to be strict, and we have to be assertive, and all if we make it play and we make it fun, they build that association, and then they're going to love it. Just like the dogs that work with you, they're looking at you, they're smiling. I mean, they literally look like they have a smile on their face. We were talking about your golden retriever before we started. I mean, that dog looks great. The healing's beautiful. The movement going through your legs in reverse. It's really nice. How long does it take you to get that sort of precision and movement with that high level of motivation and positive, healthy energy? Do you do just a lot of play in the beginning and slowly start to build it in with the obedience? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a slow burn for me. I have all the 4 dogs that you sort of see, Walter, Winnie. So Winnie's 9, she's another golden that does all that sort of stuff. And people see her and like, gee, she's got some drive. And then
is she a puppy?
Yeah. She does look, actually, people think she's a lot younger than she is, because she's really little too. She's a bit of a pocket rocket sort of dog. But yeah, I mean, I started, as soon as I bring them in, I'll start food luring, food games. I even do a lot of drive building stuff. So the big thing for me to build that drive is, and look, it's probably against conventional wisdom when it comes to, pet dog training, but I want my dogs to have zero inhibitions around me when I'm working. So what I mean by that is that I don't want my dog to feel like they can't push the lure as rude as they want, right? So I don't want to have my dog feel like they can't push into me or jump on me and all that sort of stuff. And look, there's some nuance in that. I don't train every dog exactly like that, but with sort of my dogs, I don't want to see any inhibitions. So a lot of the time I'm sort of teaching them to, initially I really want my dog to bark. It's probably the first thing, because I can bring out a lot, I can let them be themselves, bark, really come out of their shell, and then I can use that power to then start to lure the dog into positions and all that sort of stuff. So I'll start luring and I'll start rewarding when the dog's pushing. I'll do even drive building stuff with bowls. So food bowls are nice. I'll put a little bit of food in the bowl and I'll hold them back. And if they pull on the collar, I'll release them off. And then eventually I'll hold them and they'll bark and go crazy. And then I let them to the bowl. And people go, that's not what I do. I ask the dog to stay for the bowl. And, I do the complete opposite. So, those sorts of things where I'm fixing the dog really I want the dog to be basically full on. So, I'm happy for them to do all that sort of stuff. And then I'll add in the structure later. Now, if I've got a person that, really isn't interested in any of that sort of stuff, I'll obviously still build into control early. But I guess the general premise will still remain the same. I like to sort of, make sure that I want dogs to be nice and confident around their handlers. So what I look for is, if a dog's got lure suspicion, where, you try and lure them around in a spin and they and that, you go around this way and then they pull off the lure because they're like, well, have you got an agenda? That sort of stuff I want to try and eliminate really early. Because if you've got a dog that has no inhibitions around the handler and they're nice and confident around them, there's a lot of stuff you can do later on. And that's, the same with, teaching a dog to orbit and weave and, weave throughout the dog, human's body and, through their legs and all that sort of stuff. It requires some confidence and also, for the dog to feel really comfortable around the human. So a lot of that for me is about building, a strong, confident dog and then sort of adding that structure in later.
What are some other drive building exercises that you do? One of the most common ones that a lot of the foundational training that I learned early in my career was directed more towards bite work or protection sport. And we would put the dogs on a back tie. If we had multiple dogs, that would often help as long as they were close to the same energy level. You wouldn't want one really amped up and then another one that's kind of timid. But if they're all relatively close to the same energy and then someone comes out, starts teasing them with maybe a flirt pole or a tug attached to a rope or something like that, they get excited, they start to bark, we react to the barking, we bring it close to them, we let them bite, we kind of work the grip, and we would be doing this with young puppies as well. And then the handler would come up and cradle to get the dog to hold it in their mouth nicely, and then we'd have them get them to drop it, and then we would tease the dog out. That would be where it would end, where everybody would unhook their dogs from the wall and they would walk the dog out. And the whole time they're pulling the dog out, we're teasing them with the toy. And if the dog gets it on their way out, we would let them carry it out. And if they miss, then hopefully they go to their crate frustrated and they want to get back out there and they want to do it some more. And that's most of the drive building that I've done is some kind of modified version of that where we're creating that restraint. I think it's funny that you basically said restraint feeding time or something like a restraint recall, hold the puppy back, get them frustrated. Or some other simple drive building exercises that someone just starting out or they just want to increase the play and the drive that their dog has that they can start incorporating?
Yeah, there's heaps of them. So yeah, all that sort of stuff you mentioned, we'll sort of do like back tie work and things like that with the tug and all that sort of stuff, or drag-ins, I call it, where one of the exercises.
Someone drags them in.
Yeah, so do drag-in recalls or restrained recalls. We call it, a lot of people do that with puppies. So, but the other one I'll do is a lot of like food-based sort of stuff. So, I will have to build, because I want the dog to be able to push and lure really hard. So a lot of the time I'll have like my food, I think you can see my hand, food here, and I'll have the puppy on the floor and I'll hold them back a little bit. And then when they're pushing into my arm, so then we'll release them and get them to like slam into the hand. So I'll do all of that sort of stuff. I can even do it with a flat collar or a harness and hold the puppy back. And as soon as they're pushing into the collar, and then release them onto the hand. So all that sort of stuff. The other reason I'll get the dog to explore movements is I kind of start to build that into stuff. So I'll go, first thing I'll teach the dog a lot of the time is a really quick spin. So I want the dog to really spin. So if I've got a dog that's really keen on spinning, I'll do a spin and then cue them into heels. So I'll use that momentum from the spin to then build that drive into the heel behavior. So a lot of the time I'll use tricks to then leverage into my classic obedience behaviors to build speed. So a lot of it's about lure pushing, even doing that restrain type of stuff with food, tricks that then lean into drive building that way. And yeah, just a lot of drag-in stuff. I've been with long lines and a lot of food games. As I sort of mentioned earlier, I do a lot of stuff to, build food drive. But And then the other stuff, the classic stuff, the float pole work, tug work, all that sort of stuff with, back tie stuff as well. That I do with a lot of my shepherds and things. So Walter's actually got a nice bit of play drive. He'll happily tug on you could almost make him a little IGP golden retriever, but Winnie isn't that big on biting things, but retrieving, fantastic. So we sort of use that to our advantage, and I might throw out a ball and hold it back and then release her off and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, a lot of
So the
my drive building stuff is about movement and food.
so movement and then some sort of restraint or temporary restraint to build that frustration and then eventually getting to what it is that they want. So that's probably incorporated into most of the drive building, I would say, right?
Yeah, and you've got to, I'm big on sort of nuance as well. We should probably hear me speak about it a little bit as far as, you've got to work with the dog in front of you as well. Like I always explain to people when they're building drive in dogs is that, like with my shepherds, I could give them, I was saying misses build drive, right? So, the dog's going for the tug and getting to miss and it builds a bit of drive. But there's obviously a point with some dogs that you've got, well, probably with all dogs eventually, that there's diminishing returns. And that if you give, Winnie, my golden retriever, a couple of misses, she's probably going to be like, it's not, then her drive's going to disappear because she's like, I'm not winning. Whereas, Sage, my shepherd, you get her to miss 100 times and she'll still try as hard on the 101st time. So it's probably about training the dog in front of you. I mean, sometimes, with certain dogs if you're building, you've kind of got to make sure that, they might hit the tub the first time, or if I'm doing food, the second they push on my hand, I'm releasing them off. So if you've got a dog that is going to give up quite quick, you've got to be careful about how much frustration that you build into it before you're actually probably doing the opposite of what you want. So,
Right. And that's with all training. I mean, the steps can often be very much the same, but we have to adjust the steps according to the dog that we're working with. If we have a dog that, let's say, disengages rather quickly or they have low perseverance, maybe we have to start with a very high rate of reinforcement where we're giving them a lot of treats just to keep that focus. Or like you said, with the spin, that's a very common one. You start to go to get the dog to do a spin, and either A, they don't like that your arm is going over their body, so they can become a little bit cautious of that if they don't have a good relationship with you, not because you haven't built one, but because it's a client and you're just trying to show them something. And some dogs could be a little cautious. They're like, I don't really know you yet. Or they might start to turn and they go, this is too much work. So they have low perseverance. They don't have the drive to do it. So yeah, adjusting for each dog, super important. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about adjusting for the client as well. So we have some clients that really care about the journey, and we have some clients that just want to get to the destination, and some clients who just want basic control. How do you determine what is going to be best for the client that you're working with? Do you just ask them right away in the beginning, hey, do you want the details, or do you want me just to tell you what to do? And then how do you adjust the training? Do you give them this is the option I would do, but if you want quick results, you could do this, not the most recommended? Do you do anything like that?
Yeah, I'm pretty transparent with them. So when, the person first, comes to a consult with me, the first thing I probably try and get is a background on the dog. So, and, try and get an idea of what their daily routine's like, the issues that they've come to me with the dog, or they just want general obedience. And your biggest question that I actually ask them is over the 4 weeks, because it also gives you an idea of what their expectations are. But over the 4 weeks, what would you like to achieve? And, some people can say, oh, well, I want to, have huge expectations over the 4 weeks. And that's when I can usually go, hey, like either those expectations are really high, but this is what we can do, this, and this, or, their expectations are spot on. And the other thing is I can get the other, I guess, part of how do they want me to train and all that sort of stuff, or they want me to explain it properly and all that sort of thing. I think it probably is a bit more of a vibe as well. So a bit intuitive as far as, you sort of get, some people are a bit more like, hey, they just want direct, straight to the, you don't really want to know why, they just want to get it going. And then you got other people who are a little bit more, I guess probably like, a dog trainer, I guess they're a bit more obsessive and want to know the details. So I think a lot of that is probably a little bit of feel. But the hardest thing I think with trainers, and I've spoken to a lot of my training friends about this and all that sort of stuff, is juggling the owner's expectations, and I guess being malleable with your training to suit and also being able to adequately communicate what realistic expectations are as well. So it's a really hard balance that, and obviously then balancing the fact that these people are paying money and that we have to, take that into consideration as well. Like and I'm sure this happens on both sides as well. You get people who have spent a lot of money on dog training and they come to you and they're a bit exacerbated, and then they're not interested in the details. They're a bit like, hey, like I've spent thousands of dollars on training, and they've seen a trainer somewhere, and they've come to you and they're like, hey, I've spent all this money, I really want to get this solved. And that's a real hard thing for a dog trainer to be able to juggle the expectations, communicate those expectations properly, and then also juggle the fact that these people are the client is emotionally taxed by their dog. So I don't think dog trainers really have it really easy, especially when you look at as well the current environment online and things, and there's a lot of judgment about different training methods and all that sort of stuff. So it's a really tricky thing to judge. I've probably gone a little bit off on a tangent, but it sort of brings up other topics as well.
Well, it's another reason why understanding the science is so important. What if you
Yeah.
get a client who they don't want to use rewards? They just want the dog to listen because the dog is subordinate. They're the alpha, and the dog needs to listen to them. And they just want them to listen. They don't want to. They don't want to bribe them with treats. Although I hate when people say bribe with treats. That just always drives me crazy because bribing is just an illegal form of payment.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
you pay an employee, you bribe the judge.
yeah,
So either you're paying your dog for working with you or you're not. You're just forcing them to do things.
yeah.
Do you help them like, all right, fine, I'll show you how to do it, but it's not what I recommend? And then if that is the case, because I've done that before where they don't want to use treats, they don't want to use toys, they just want the dog to listen. And I tell them that's not my recommendation, but I can show you. And then we just use like pressure, leash pressure, make the dog do it. But that's no fun. It sucks.
Yeah, yeah. Look, so for me, if someone sort of mentions that they don't want to use food rewards or whatever, I'll sort of explain to them, why I use food rewards, as in, dogs deserve to be paid. That's, you're going to, I guess, the result's going to be, to me, a lot worse. And and the dogs also, it, to an extent, don't do things just to please us. Like there's
Right.
like dogs. We need to have a payment there, and my biggest gripe, I guess, a lot of the time if people use no food rewards is that a lot of the time they'll kind of word it as if it's this relationship based training, and the dog's doing things to please, but then they use heaps of pressure, right? So the dog's complying really because of the pressure, but it's sort of worded as if it's the relationship type of thing. And I think there's no shortcuts. So that's why I try and explain to people, you can either use positive reinforcement here. If you're not using food, there's usually some form of pressure on the other end to get the compliance. Look, if a person's flat out not wanting to use food, and I can see a dog's got food drive and heaps of potential and all that sort of stuff, honestly, a lot of the time I'll probably say, hey, look, I'm not the trainer for you. It's probably not. I'm not the person to train your dog. I think there's probably someone else out there that'll do it. But yeah, when it probably comes to that point, I probably would refer on and say it's not my thing.
And not because you couldn't do it, but more so because it's not enjoyable. It's not enjoyable for the dog.
Yeah, it's
And you can
not.
spend your
No.
time with clients that want to do it the right way.
Yeah, I mean, I get some dogs that don't have food drive. Very rarely. I mean, you'll always get dogs that have, usually if a dog's got no food drive, there'll usually be a few things that are happening. One, the person might be like free feeding and having food out all day, and the dog's just full. Or the dog is not in great condition as far as they could do with probably losing 1 or 2 kilos, and their food drive will probably come up, as in they're just not free, they're not conditioned very well. And or the other one is that you've got a dog that is not used to taking food out of a human's hand, is sort of the other sort of way. So sometimes you will get dogs that have no food drive, but I usually will give them some exercises as they go. But I'm happy to train a dog. Usually I try and find something that motivates them. But if I have to, we can teach them, in the meantime, if I've got a dog that comes in, no food drive, and it's not because they're anxious, it's not because of those things that I mentioned. Building in some leash pressure and all that sort of stuff and teaching the dog how to respond to the leash is going to be really handy anyway. And then using praise and switching off the line
Right.
pressure sort of stuff is going to be, um, beneficial for them in the long run. So usually I'll start with that and then help them find a motivation for the dog in the meantime. So session one might be building line pressure and, working out how to build praise in so it's effective and all that sort of stuff, and leash mechanics. And then,
And
hey,
dogs can really get a lot from praise too. Certain dogs really feed off of that. So, I mean, we can train without food. We can use things like toys or even just praise and get some really nice results with some dogs. And of course, that goes back to what you were saying before, adjusting for the dog that's in front of you. One of the things that always frustrated me was when I would be dealing with extreme negative behavioral contrast. So, like you were saying, the owners free feed or they leave toys everywhere. The dog's running around playing, it's doing stuff all day. And then I'm supposed to get that dog to work for me. The dog goes, "No way. I'm not. I get this stuff for free all day. I just finished playing for the past 5 hours with the other dogs in the house, running in and out, playing with toys that are setting everywhere, free feeding. There's no way I'm going to work for you." And that's usually not that bad if I would tell the owner, "Hey, make sure you put the things away. Let's build some drive. Let's get the dog wanting to work for these things." And then once the drive is established, if you want to do those things again later, go ahead, but help us with the training process to make it easier. And I would say most people are pretty compliant and they follow those directions, especially when we point out the science. But every now and then I get some that don't, and it just makes the training so much more difficult. Do you just work through those, or is there some other strategy that you do to try to increase the dog's motivation if you're dealing with that negative behavioral contrast, or some people also call it what, the violation of expectation?
yeah, I think people have to be helping themselves really. Actually, on that note, I'll come back to that question. I mentioned before, some things that I can't explain that work. Funnily enough, sometimes I don't know if you found the same thing, but there might be a dog that's not taking food, and if you start leash pressure exercises, suddenly the dog starts to. For some reason, leash pressure work can sometimes, I assume, lower overstimulation a little bit, and suddenly you've got a dog taking food, which is really interesting. But anyway, and it's one of those things that people ask me, "Why does it work?" I'm like, "Don't know." So, but yeah, I think that sort of contrast in as far as you're trying to help people out, but they're doing things outside of it to probably sabotage the results a little bit.
Mhm.
And a lot of the time, I'll make sure that going through what people are doing at the home. So big things like reactivity is a lot of the time, you might be working a dog with reactivity and you're doing these sessions, but, at home, the dog's, barking at dogs against the window all day, or, just doing things that are not in line with, the result that they want, or, they're working reactivity, but outside of that, they're taking the dogs to a dog park or something and the dog's practicing all these, terrible behaviors and overstimulation and all the rest. So I think it applies to a lot of different problems across the board, not just your food drive where, you're trying to build something, engagement, and there, you've got food all over the place, and overfeeding the dog and, toys everywhere and all that sort of stuff. I think it probably applies to a lot of situations when you're sort of
Oh,
working a dog.
yeah.
They need to be I think their lifestyle needs to be in line with the result that they want. So,
Well,
and
most of the problems that we're trying to help people fix is often created by the mistakes that they themselves have made. Often based on some of the stuff that we were talking about earlier, the myths that have been put into place. Like, oh, if you have a dog that's aggressive, never play tug with it because it's going to make it more aggressive. Or resource guarding, taking
the,
things away,
yeah,
right? So,
bullying.
I mean, because people want to be the alpha. They think that they have to be the alpha and they have to take things away from their dog, and their dog is just supposed to let them take it away. I can't tell you how many resource guarding cases that I worked with where they call me up and they're like, "Yeah, the dog's food aggressive." And then I say, "So what sort of training have you done?" They're like, "Well, we want to make sure that the dog knows that we're the alpha." And so when we went to take it away, it's like, you're creating the problem. The problem would never even exist had you not gone to take something away. And I don't think it's coincidence the fact that every dog that I've raised, which is a dozen plus, where I've raised them from puppy and up, not a single one of them have ever had resource guarding issues because I don't take things away. But of course,
Yeah, I looked at it. sort of satire reel on that about sort of 6 to 12 months ago that did actually go quite viral, and I got a fair bit of pushback from it because I think people are so, as you mentioned before, it's ingrained that, we take the
Mm.
food away and basically annoy the dog from a young age when they're eating food. And, people always ask me like, oh, doesn't, simply letting them eat their food or,
Right.
building positive associations of people approaching and all that sort of stuff, or even, with resourcey dogs playing games with the ball and tug and all that sort of stuff so the dogs disarm a little bit is nonsense, and it doesn't work. And Walter, we mentioned a few times, of the flame tail. He, I didn't have him as a puppy. He was a puppy, but he actually got sent back to the breeder. He's a bit of a random story. So he went to a family, and he had some really bad resource guarding issues. He went there and he was trying to bite him and all sorts of things when they were around his food or tug toys and all that sort of stuff. And the breeder, who we've got Winnie from as well, she's fantastic. Health, does all the right stuff, health testing, DNA testing, and registered, all that sort of stuff, and does and really cares about her dogs. She rang me and said, "Oh, look, I've had this dog return, this puppy return. He was 16 weeks old, and he's got some really bad resource guarding issues apparently. And can you look after him for a week and do an assessment?" So I said, "Yeah, sure. Bring him in, and I'll have him with my dogs or whatever, and we'll do some work." And I had him there for a week, and I really loved him, and he's still here, so I've got him now. And yeah, he was resource guarding. As like you'd give his food bowl, and if you were too close, he'd go off at you, or saying with toys and all that sort of stuff. And I did exactly that. I, approached and built positive associations, dropped a bit of chicken in and walked off, and then started playing a lot of games with him with tugs. So, allowed him to possess it, and then, play little
Mhm.
games where if he was not quick enough, I'd take it and run away. And then he sort of, initially he was sort of a bit possessive over it. And then he's like, actually, this is kind of fun. And you sort of start to loosen the dog up a little bit, and then they're disarmed. And Walter is great now. He's not, you could, if you wanted to, you could take your food away, no worries. You could do whatever. He wouldn't have a go at you. And I think that was sort of one of those things that could have gone the other way really bad if we hadn't have changed
Mhm.
that approach that I guess the previous owners were sort of going for. So I guess it's sort of living proof that you don't have
Yeah, and
to,
I
you know.
and I think it's important to bring up this subject. I've talked about it on a couple of the other podcast episodes that I've done, and I did one recently with Carlos Ramirez, which just posted last week. And he even said, he's like, the dog never even thought about you taking something away until you went to take something away. And of course, some dogs may have resource guarding issues that doesn't
Yep.
stem from something being taken away. It's not always just environmental. Some things are in the dog's genetics. But if people are aware of this, then they can often avoid these problems by not putting the dog in the situation where the dog feels like they have to defend it. And then when we incorporate games and we play tug, like you were saying, then the dog is disarmed because we build that trust. And
Yeah,
so these issues, go ahead.
sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think in a way, the fact that, resource guarding is heavily genetic is kind of, in a way, it makes the issue among handlers anyway, or people, worse, because what they do is they get a puppy and then they handle the dog and annoy the dog basically with their food and take stuff away. And they're like, I did that with my puppy and my puppy's fine. And I'm like, yeah, well, your dog probably would never have done it. Whatever you did,
Right.
the dog doesn't have the genetic tendency for resource guarding. They're not possessive. And so people get this confirmation bias. They train a couple of puppies and they did
Mhm.
that. Dog wasn't resource guarding. So apparently that works. But the problem is you probably could have done anything and the dog wouldn't have been resource guarding. So, until you get a puppy that is truly possessive from a genetic point of view, then if they did that, they're going to get themselves in trouble. And, that could be 9, 10 dogs down the line, and or they might not never have 9, 10 dogs. So, over their lifetime. So, people get that confirmation bias that what they're doing is correct. And it's the same thing, going slightly off topic, sometimes you'll be training a working dog, a healer. For some reason it happens with healers a lot, or Kelpies or Border Collies. You're training a dog and the client goes, oh, well, my next door neighbor who's got a Border Collie doesn't think I should be doing dog training. He said, just do this and the dog will follow you around everywhere. And you're like, well, I'm sorry, but he got a really lucky genetically biddable dog. Your dog is this. And, he's had one dog that's done that, and that he's now got some confirmation bias that his methods
Hmm.
work, when in reality, he probably could have done anything and the dog was going to, fly, follow them around everywhere, very biddable, wants to do the right thing. So, I think confirmation bias across the board does lead to a lot of myths being perpetuated. And yeah, resource scouting is probably a big one. Uh,
Yes. And that goes
Further,
back to frame of reference.
yeah,
And it's also a good thing to look at dog training as guidelines as well. They're not
yeah,
strict rules, but certain guidelines are in place that could really help. So if we look at and we take resource guarding, we say, okay, the guideline for resource guarding is don't take anything away from your dog until you have a really strong relationship and you've built this working environment where the dog enjoys being with you, enjoys working with you, enjoys playing with you. And then if you do need to grab its food, it's for a reason. So, like with my German Shepherd, he's almost 2 years of age now, and he's a big boy. He's got a big head and he can bite really hard. If he wanted to, he could do some serious damage. But
yeah,
if I need to move something that he has, if he has a bully stick or he has one of his toys and I just want to move him and I want to grab something and move it to a different spot because maybe I'm moving it past other dogs, so I don't want any issues with the resource with multiple dogs, and I could easily take it from him, take it to another spot because he trusts me. He knows that I'm going to give it back to him, that I'm not actually taking it. And then you are able to take things from the dogs. That's a very interesting way of looking at it as well. You'll get to that point, but don't do it in this way to prove or assert dominance.
yeah,
And it's kind of the same thing with like leash reactivity. Often, most people, I would say, they want to attack the issue head on. They want to say, okay, I'm dealing with a resource guarding issue, so I'm going to go straight for that and I'm going to deal with that. Or my dog's reactive on leash, so I'm going to go right to where the trigger is and I'm going to start working on that. Something you say is that I believe, if I'm saying this correctly, is that 99% of problems will vanish if you just start training your dog.
yeah.
Does that apply to this, or what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, it does. When I go to consults for reactivity, people have purchased a bundle of consults because they want to work with the dog with reactivity. Sometimes I come with it because I use all my dogs for basically as, uh, I guess, setup dogs for reactivity. So Riot, Sage, Walter, Winnie, they all come along with me in a van and bring them out and do all that sort of stuff. But I don't bring them to session one in particular. So I get there and a lot of the time I'm like, oh, well, where's the dogs working on reactivity? And I'm like, we're not going to work with the dogs today. And, a lot of the time that's, trying to, I guess, educate people that they need to build their foundations first before I'd even think about bothering with the dogs, because the actual relationship isn't there yet. So the reason I sort of say, that people are overcomplicating it and they need to get out there and train their dogs sometimes is that people are either they're scared to get out because they're like, oh, I want to be able to do, how do I work with my dog's reactivity? And they're jumping they're jumping the start line. Basically, what I think most people should be doing is getting out there, building a great relationship with their dog, building some play with their dog, building engagement through, drive building games and tricks and spins and all that sort of stuff to build in movement and orbits and all that sort of stuff. And if you've done a lot of that, most, say if you've got a dog with reactivity, you can probably eliminate 80% of it just by doing some foundations. Yes, we still have to go and do the 20% to, start to really proof it and, build in all the concepts. But unless the dog's got great foundations, you can't build in those concepts like, like look at that or counter conditioning and that sort of stuff. It's very hard to build that in if your dog doesn't have a drive to want to interact with the handler anyway. So
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of issues can be fixed almost entirely by just getting out there and having fun with your dog and being consistent. So, people often think that you need to go out and do 2 hours of training a day. You don't. You just need to get out there and 10 minutes is fine. Get out there and work your dog for 10 minutes with some training. Obviously, they still need to do their extracurricular stuff that you'd normally do, but getting out there and just committing to bonding with your dog for 10 or 15 minutes a day, you'd be surprised if they're consistent, they'll start to get really good results. So
For sure. 10 minutes a day would make a huge impact on most people's relationship and overall training obedience that they have with their dogs.
yeah,
There's something that I like to call environmental difficulty assessment. And this is when we are looking at different environments and how many distractions are in the environment that's going to make it more challenging for the dog, a big part of proofing. And an analogy I often use with a lot of my clients is I say, think about, even if you don't play video games, you probably will still understand this analogy. I say, think about it as an open world game. Most people know these, you have these big, massive open worlds that you can go and explore with your character. And your character starts off at level one, doesn't really have any techniques, no skills. And you can go to multiple places on the map. You can go to places that are meant for later stages in the game, but you better not mess with any of the combatants, because if you do, their level is going to be significantly higher than yours is. And no matter how good you are at fighting in the game, they're going to take you out every single time. Okay, so what do you have to do? You have to go back and you have to power up your character. You have to learn more skills. You have to work in environments that are not as difficult or as challenging. And I say, do the same thing with your dog. That's what you're doing. You're building up your character. The more techniques, the more movements, the more exercises and tricks that you teach your dog, the more your dog starts to generalize this concept of obedience and training, and things just start to become easier and easier. It's like that snowball effect. As the dog starts to learn, things become increasingly easy to teach. Do you notice that with your dogs as well? The more you teach them, the easier it is to teach them new things.
Yeah, exactly. They start to understand that, I guess, the communication lines between the handler and dog open up. The dog starts to
Mm-hmm.
understand, all the different nuances of my little quirks, I guess. So, and that's the thing, is probably trying to, over time, the dog starts to understand, my weaknesses and my strengths, and dogs will then start to become forgiving of those as well, I guess. So for, I've got some bad habits, with my training and handling and all that sort of stuff. But I think the more you train your dog, the more your dog actually understands them as well. Look fast.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, opening up those communication lines, I think, is probably the big thing, and building up the understanding of the methodology that you're using with the dog, so the dog understands all the different concepts. I think is going to be helpful to them being able to, as you mentioned before, take on the higher level
Right.
enemies.
Exactly. Do you film your own training? Not stuff that you're posting on social media, but if you're working through a certain technique or an exercise you're trying to get, maybe you're working on a really nice focus heel and you want to see how the dog is lining up while you're moving and not looking at the dog or whatever. Do you film yourself and review the footage often? Is that a practice that you do?
I do, actually. I almost film every session. I'll show you about my phone here. So
You just set it up on a tripod?
yeah, I've set it up on a tripod. Nothing special.
Yeah, you
Uh,
don't have one of those tracking tripods?
no, I do, but I'm not very good at using it. Um, so if you have a look here, I'll make sure that so I've got 1,329 videos on here. So and I have a little iCloud account so I can upload them so it doesn't go on my phone. But yeah, I should probably delete a few. But I do record all my training. A lot of the time, the other reason I record a lot of my training is that sometimes I'll do something and I'll be like, oh, that'll be good to put on, as a video. So, and I'm like, oh, that gives me an idea. But the other reason I'll film is a lot of the time when I'm editing a lot of videos for social media and all that sort of stuff. I go through it and I'm like, oh, that wasn't a good rep, or
Mhm.
or I'm doing this wrong. And that's the thing, actually, is the other thing. The reason to post on social media a lot of the time is that you analyze your own training a bit. So, I'll sort of try and find reps that, not that I'm trying to post up something perfect, but I'm trying to post up something that is representative of what I want to try and get across. So people,
Mhm.
I don't show people, all bad movements, because otherwise people are going to be doing bad movements. So,
Right.
finds, the rights, and I'm flicking through and going, oh, I did this wrong, did this wrong, did this wrong. So I know, next time I'm filming it, and sometimes I've done that, and I've gone to film something and I'm like, oh, I'll do a tutorial. And then I've gone, oh, I actually need to improve my own handling here. I'll go back and refilm it. So the filming, so I can give people accurate information. So, the other reason to get posts online is it gives you, if anything, a portfolio of the training to reflect on. Like, even with my own dogs, if I look at training content that I posted 2 years ago, I look at it and I'm like, oh, geez, I've come a long way even in 2 years. And, I've been training for, as I said before, probably 12 years now. And every time I look at a video, even 6 months before, I'm like, oh, I've improved a lot. So, and every
Mhm.
time I get a new dog, I'm always like, I would do things differently than I had my last puppy, sort of thing. So I think you're always evolving. I'm probably going on a bit of a tangent now again. So, but yeah, I think in short, I do film all my training, and look at some that I can't be bothered putting up the video
I
on.
was asking that because I'm a true believer that it accelerates and improves our training quite rapidly. I mean, every time I film myself, I can see little mistakes that I'm making, and then I'm able to adjust and improve the next time I'm working, even just one single session. And I think it's something that even someone who's new and just starting out, there's still little things that they can look for. The most common mistakes, like one of the ones I tell all my students to look for is what I call pairing, but the technical term overshadowing, right? If we're trying to get the dog conditioned to the marker or we're trying to get them to respond to the verbal, being able to separate the physical from the verbal is very difficult. And often in the moment while you're doing it, it might feel like you're separating the physical from the verbal, but then you watch the footage and you're like, I cannot tell. It looks like I'm pairing everything. Right.
Mhm.
But even little things like that, what I tell my students when they're first starting out, I say, after you finish recording, then I want you to review the footage 3 times. It sounds like a little bit of overkill, but I say, first time you watch it through, just focus on either yourself or the dog. Then the next time, just focus on the opposite of whatever you did the first time. And then the third time, look at the whole picture.
Yep.
And as you do this, you're going to start noticing things even faster than you did before. And I think this is a big, important part of being a professional dog trainer. Because if someone's learning to be a professional dog trainer and they're filming all their own training sessions and they're critiquing themselves and they're adjusting, that gives them the ability to do the same thing for their clients. They're going to have an eye to where they can see things that they probably wouldn't have been able to see if they were just practicing in isolation without reviewing their training. So it makes them a better teacher in the long run and a better trainer. Talking about making yourself or becoming a good dog trainer, what would you say is the defining characteristic or trait of someone that makes a good professional dog trainer? If there's something that you could say, like, I'll tell you what I, just to give you some more context, the way that I look at it for a professional dog trainer is how long does it take before the client no longer needs them? Unless it's something like advanced competition protection, that stuff just takes a long time. But the average pet client, how long do they need their dog trainer for? If they need their dog trainer for 9 months, might be something wrong with that picture.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So so you wanted to know, I guess, what I think is a good attribute for a dog,
Yes,
sort of
yes.
thing. Yeah, yeah. So can I give you multiple?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Yeah, yeah. So I think probably a big one that I talk about, and actually someone got not very happy that I spoke about this, but one of them is tactful communication. I think, in that, you know, I think there's a bit of an art form. You can really like dogs, but if you don't like interacting with people, you're probably not going to be, a great dog trainer, sort of thing. I think people have to like talking with people, and I think a lot of people do get into dog training because they like dogs and don't like talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it's communication with people. The dog stuff is a big part of it, but I think, if unless you've sort of been able to tactfully communicate, and what I mean by tactfully communicate, it's being able to tell a client that they're doing something wrong in a way that doesn't offend them. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really difficult, because if you're offending them, they're not buying in. So, and look, the other thing as well is, being able to read your client as well, in that, sometimes so for me, if I've go to consults, to see some trainers sometimes to get, fresh eyes on my dogs, because I'm not perfect, and it's nice to get input. So
Mm-hmm.
if I like direct feedback, I don't like, people, I guess, smoke and mirroring the whole thing, and kind of, giving me drip feeding it because they're worried about offending me. I kind of like really direct communication, but it's sort of knowing your clients as well, and knowing how that they want that communication fed. So, and sometimes asking them, hey, like, do you mind? How do you want me to give you this feedback? Would you prefer it to be blunt and direct, or would you prefer it to be, a little bit more nuanced, or I guess tactful, and more thoughtful in the way it's delivered? So I guess sometimes that again is a bit intuitive. The other, I guess, thing is that's going to make a good dog trainer as well. I might not be answering your question entirely accurately, but is being humble enough to get feedback from other trainers. So the best thing I've probably ever done is trained with other dog trainers and made friends and that sort of stuff. Because even though I film all my stuff and I train a lot of the time, half the time probably by myself, the most best feedback that I ever get is when I'm training with others. So for example, a couple of weeks ago, I thought Wright's healing, I'd fixed something about his healing where he was dropping his head slightly, and I sort of taught him to push a little bit, and hold his head nice and high as a reference point. And Tegan, even in the filming, because I wasn't really filming in the right angles, I was walking away from her camera, and she was like, "Oh, his rear end is like out wide because he's like pushing here, and it feels good when you're walking. You're like looking down at it, and your reference point's all great, but it's not right." So, and I would never have picked that up because I just didn't see it from where I was looking. So, I wasn't picking it up on either video because I tend to walk across the camera and not out that way a lot of the time when I'm doing heel work. So, I've gone on a massive tangent again, but making sure that you're happy to, I guess learn from others is probably the big thing. And I've learned so much in the last couple of years, even by teaming up with, Bryce and Tegan, who I train a lot with, who you probably see, I do a lot of training with online. So, and Tegan, who's been training a long time in dog sports and stuff, has sort of helped me with a lot of different things, and we help each other and all that sort of stuff. So being open to learning off others. And the other one is probably just patience. I mean, dog training has taught me to be an incredibly patient person. And I think sometimes I could, it allows me to also, translate that skill into other parts of my life as well. Having patience and taking a deep breath when you're training, when things aren't going properly, and being able to very quickly pivot and change plans. So I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of answered it.
Yeah, and it leads me to the next question, because something you said earlier about having a client that's already worked with one, two, multiple trainers, they spent thousands of dollars and they haven't gotten the results. This is really common amongst trainers that I speak with, that they've had clients that have gone through training, spent thousands of dollars, and now they're on this other trainer and hoping that that trainer can fix the issues. Well, obviously there's something going on where people are hiring these different trainers and they're not getting the results and they're spending thousands of dollars. What can someone look for who's not a professional dog trainer when it comes to picking and hiring a professional dog trainer?
Yeah, that's an easy one. Look, for me, I always give the same advice to everyone, because I'm not the trainer for everyone, and a lot of people like my training, but some people don't. I have haters on social media that don't like what I do and all that sort of stuff. And I think you probably have the same experience sometimes. I assume you get the odd person commenting that you're like, oh, but
of course,
yeah, sort of a part of life. So, but what I sort of explain to people is, that if you look at the picture that trainer's creating. So if you go on and you're looking for a local trainer in the area, and you go to their website and they've got videos and a portfolio. Effectively, I think every trainer these days should have a portfolio of their training. Is probably the first thing. There's no excuse these days not to have some training on socials that people can refer to. And I think I always sort of get people to look for a trainer, look at their portfolio. Is the picture that they're creating with the dog what you want to create with your dog? And because if you want this, it's happy-go-lucky dog, and the picture of what you want to create isn't what they're creating, they're not going to create it when you go and employ them to train your dog. So big thing for me is that you go and find a trainer that produces a picture that you like, and it's likely that if you follow their advice, that's probably the picture that you're going to create with your dog. You're not going to create a different picture than what's you've already seen. So, and when it comes back to, before, I've got, people, you've got haters online or people that are critical of me and all that sort of stuff. there are people that don't like the picture that I create, and I'm happy with that. That's fine. I'm happy with the picture I create with my dogs. So, but they might not like it, and the usual reasons people, they're like, oh, I don't like this crazy engagement. Some people like a dog that is a little bit more and calm, and they don't like the look of a dog that is really engaged, I guess I'd call it, but they'd probably call it something else. And that's fine. You're always going to have that. And I think, if you've got, and that's why I'm trying to make sure that I put all my stuff online. And if people inquire with me, I'm like, hey, like, I want to make sure that you like my style of dog training, because you might not like it. So, they go on, I give them my link to my profile and I'm like, look at all the training. If you like what you see, then, give me a call and we'll organize a training session. So then obviously the other stuff that you look for is, qualifications is obviously a bonus if they're, committed to education, whether that be, going to seminars or, doing something to advance their knowledge. We've sort of touched on a little bit, qualifications and stuff are great, but, there's some amazing dog trainers as well that have done all the stuff through mentorships and training. So it's not the be all and end all, but I think and then obviously experience and sorry, we'll further basically experience, and then having a large portfolio of dogs that they've trained that you can view is probably a good starting point to choose a dog trainer. And then obviously after that you look at your reviews and all that sort of thing.
You made some really good points there, especially the one about looking at the portfolio. And you're right, there are no excuses at this point. It's so easy to pull out your phone and start filming that every dog trainer at this point should have some kind of portfolio that a potential client can look at. And what about tools and techniques? How do you decide what to use for each dog? Do you have certain go-to tools, for example, like a type of collar or a clicker or maybe a long line that you find invaluable? And on the flip side, are there any tools or methods you've moved away from as you've evolved in your training style? And I'm also interested in how you explain the tools that you do use to owners, especially if they're skeptical. How do you introduce things like an e-collar or a prong collar, if you do use those, in a way that makes sense and keeps the owner on board with the process?
Yeah, great questions. So someone asked me this on my Instagram stories the other day, actually, and I gave them a very quick overview. But basically, look, none of my training, I try not to rely on tools if I can. So generally speaking, I'll try and use a flat collar if I can. Usually, I'll use food. Flirt pole is a big one that I use a lot of.
Which one? I missed that last one.
Flirt pole. So
Flirt pole. Yeah. Okay.
They're here. Yeah. So flirt poles use a lot of tug balls. Food. Your typical leash and collar long line. I try and not be as reliant on tools as I can. I've got a little bit of a interesting, I guess, thought process when it comes to tool use and things. But in Victoria, where I live in particular, we're actually quite restricted in what you can use. So for prong collars aren't legal here. So I've probably only seen 2 or 3 prong collars in 12 years here. So they're not super common. E-collars are somewhat restricted. And yet typically I don't use them. As far as, I guess, where I stand on them, I think as far as I live in regional Victoria, so a lot of the time people have issues with like sheep worrying or like livestock stuff where a dog is attacking livestock, and if the dog goes over there again, the farmer's going to do something not nice to the dog. So in that sort of scenario, I think e-collars are perfectly well justified and all that sort of stuff. So I don't really have any problems with their use or anything, as long as they're used tactfully. And as before, there's a few little ethical considerations that I put in place when I'm considering, say, an e-collar. But yeah, generally speaking, I don't use them for all general obedience stuff. And a lot of the time, I've had a person that spoke to me about sheep worrying or livestock worrying and stuff, and I've referred them to my trainer friend who's very experienced with that sort of stuff, because the e-collars aren't really my thing. I'm not very good with them, or that many. It's not my specialty area. So generally speaking, I try and rely more on the stuff that I like using. Look, I'll use a slip leash sometimes. So people always ask me about my slip leash usage. I'll use that a little bit for leash pressure. I think it's a great thing for leash pressure because you can be quite finessed with a slip leash. So I'll use that. I hope I haven't been too confusing about where I stand with e-collars. Yeah, prong
And
we can.
have there been restrictions on prong collars and remote collars since you've been training as a professional trainer, or is that something that's been more recent?
No, prong collars, as far as I'm aware, have been banned for for a long time. Victoria is quite restrictive actually. We've got so e-collars you can use if you get ticked off by a vet, technically, I believe, or under the guidance of a certain certification here. Um, so you can use them in that scenario. And what else was I going to say? Yeah, we're quite restricted in the fact that, for example, even bike sports is technically it's not allowed in Victoria, so it's all good. Pretty much every other state in Australia, the Victoria IGP is quite restricted as well. So, which sort of sucks because I think it's a terrible law.
I was asking because I was curious if you were there for the transition, because that's something that they're trying to do in different areas. They're trying to ban the use of certain tools. So I was curious to see if you noticed what the impact was like and what the adjustment period was
So
of
we're
having
kind
those
of
tools taken away.
really
Sorry, go
unique
ahead.
in that Victoria is very isolated. Australia's, I don't know how many states there are, 7 or 8, 7 states, whatever. And a lot of people will travel to different states where it is allowed. So look, there is, I think in Victoria, I see a lot of head halters, probably more than probably what people would see elsewhere. Probably because prongs are banned and things like that. And look, my sort of opinion on head halters is they're largely probably more aversive in general. So look, I think the arguments, for and against sort of head halters, for example, why head halters are allowed and prongs aren't, not sure. But yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one.
And you said you use slip leads sometimes, but it's not something it's not a go-to for you.
Yeah. So I'll use slip leash sometimes. So, to build in some leash pressure if a dog's sort of having trouble. A lot of the time, um, I'll use slip leashes to, condition leash pressure when it comes to loose leash walking and things like that. So, I guess I probably use them a fair bit. But yeah, other than that, collar, leash, harness. So I, generally speaking, if people ask me, what my theory is on training methods, is I'll usually try and, my first point of call is to make things as, I guess, without sounding really cliche with the lemur thing, but least invasive, minimally aversive is a really good description of where I sort of go first. So if I can, train a dog and get a result force free, I'll go for it. And then there's some dogs I think really do. And then I'll sort of start to, then from then on as a trainer, I think you've got to ethically weigh up the addition of aversive control and go, okay, what's the alternative here if we can't get this going? And then add in, what you need to. So
I agree with that approach. And I find the slip lead very interesting because I don't recall slip leads being very popular or used that often 10 years ago. And now it seems like everyone's starting to use them. And people ask me if I use slip leads, and I never use slip leads. I mean, I might use a slip lead if I'm transferring a dog from one kennel to the next and I just need to move them very quickly. But I've never seen any additional value in using a slip lead for training because I feel like I get really nice results just using a flat martingale collar and a leash. And the reason why I like the martingale collar more than the slip lead is because it can sit nice and loose and comfortable on the dog's neck. And then when I go to add pressure, it can tighten it, but I can have a stopping point so it's not choking the dog. And I feel like I have more control over the sensitivity and the input using the martingale with a normal leash than I ever have with a slip lead, especially depending on how the slip lead is on. Of course, which way it's facing could affect the pull of the slip lead.
Yeah,
but go
I
ahead.
think martingales are a good choice. So yeah, we see them heaps in here, and but no issues with using them. So there's sort of probably a lot of the time, to be honest, I'll use what the owner's comfortable using a lot of the time. So the other thing that I guess gets lost a lot of the time in on socials when people argue about tool use and things is sometimes you've got to weigh up what's going on. Like sometimes you might work with a person that, okay, they haven't got a dog that really matches their lifestyle and that they might be, elderly and a falls risk or something like that. And they've got like a giant Great Dane. Now, I can't in my right mind put that dog in a harness, and like it's a massive liability, right? So if the dog makes a mistake, they're getting pulled over. So you've got to kind of, I think it always neglects that part of the conversation that we've got a duty also to keep our clients safe. And
Mhm.
sometimes, for example, I just said I don't like head halters that much. I'll often put a head halter on a Great Dane if the person, is not, if I feel the person is not physically able to hold them, because, hey, like, okay, yeah, the dog doesn't like it that much, even after conditioning. It's a little bit aversive, but the alternative is, yeah, that the dog pulls the owner over the road or something, and they can't physically hold them, and then we've got a big issue in our hands. So, from that point of view, ethically for me, that checks out. So yeah, I think, and that's what I mean by, when you ask me about, science-based training and all that sort of stuff, I think you've got to weigh up a lot. Dog trainers don't have an easy job a lot of the time, and that they've, obviously there's plenty of them. I'm sure I'm not minimizing anyone else's job, but dog trainers have a really tough choice when they're weighing up the results of the dog. The human behind on the other end of the leash, the ethics involved, the safety concerns, and all that sort of stuff. So, and obviously the financial burden that the person has had, as well, or how much of an emergency, the time constraint too to actually
Mhm.
fix behavior can sometimes dictate how you train a dog, which people don't like to talk about very much. But we don't always have a long period of time or a person that's willing to put in
Mhm.
that time. So that's when you have to, consider, okay, you're weighing up the ethics and versus control and things like that. So that's a tricky one.
There's a lot to consider. It's something I was talking about with Robert Cabral. When I was doing stay in trains, I used to just do as short as 2 weeks, and I would get really nice results quite often in those 2 weeks. But some of the issues that I ran into is when I was getting dogs that had fear issues or aggression issues, the 2 weeks just wasn't enough time to build a relationship with the dog. And so I started implementing what I called the adjustment period. And I didn't even charge clients for that because I didn't want them to think that I was just taking advantage of them and just using that to collect boarding. Like, oh, nope, your dog's still on the adjustment period. We need to do boarding for another week. And I would keep the dog. I wouldn't charge for that time just so the dog can get comfortable with me. So then when I did start the training, I wasn't rushing certain steps that I think are invaluable when it comes to training and working with a dog. And I agree with the tools too. That's with my clients, I usually whatever they're using is what I work with. The only thing that I will change more often than not are the leashes that they're using. If they come with a big chain leash or these really thick ones with 20 extra loops on
Or
it, I get rid
one,
of those.
yeah.
So I
Um,
like the very simple nylon or even the thin leather, but something easy to handle that's not going to be weighted down and is going to add more that the dog's going to notice, especially if you are doing any sort of pressure based training. If you have a really heavy leash, it's going to be more noticeable for the dog, which is going to affect how the dog responds to it. And speaking of dogs, out of all the dogs that you've worked with, is there one case that was especially challenging for you? Something that really tested your patience or your skills? And if so, what was the situation and how did you work through it?
It was actually a really funny story about that. Yeah, when I actually first started training, I was taking on consults. I've been training for a few years by this point, and I had done a couple of consults, and I got this call. Look, I don't know, I can't believe I'm putting this out on social media. It was quite a funny story, so it'll be good. I've spoken to my friends about this one. I almost quit dog training after that day. Funnily enough, I'll tell you the rest of the story after. But they rang up, and I thought, at that point, as you do when you're a young dog trainer, that you think, I thought I was amazing, and done all this, trained all these dogs and all that sort of stuff. And a guy rang me. He's out in the farm with a bauble, um, South African Mastiff, big dog, intimidating dog. And I come out, and this dog's huge, basically, as big as I am, and he goes, "Oh well, look, the dog is not recalling, and he was chasing the horses and out in the paddock." And you know I was like, cool, let's just normally do. We do like some engagement work and some recall work on this leash and on a long line and stuff. And I said to him at the time, and it probably comes back to equipment that, at that time I probably wasn't experienced enough to have the experience to check off all these things. That he had a little like chain collar thing around the farm. I live out in regional Vic. There's farms everywhere. I've out on property myself, and we did some recall, and this dog, launched against this long line, and completely snapped this long line. And there's this dog chasing this horse for, I'd say, I'm standing there, just I don't know what to do, and chasing this horse, and the horse is, it wasn't a very good situation, and we finally got under control, and I got this. I put this dog back in, and it just felt really funny doing, calling the dog in and giving this giant dog this little treat to come in, and he was sort of looking at me, like the dog was sort of looking at me like, "Is that all you got?" kind of thing. Is he was, really prey driven dog, and then we sort of went down and worked him, put him on this new thing, and we're around the goats, and we're doing some recall, and everything was going really well until we went out to the goats, and this dog was just so strong. I was getting dragged along the ground and all sorts of things. And I finished the session, and I gave him some homework or whatever, and I rang my partner Bianca on the way home. I said, "I'm never training dogs again after this." This dog really brought me down to ground level, and he gave me a check for $80, and I still have that check in my I never cashed it, so I've still got it sitting in the drawer. It was pretty funny, but yeah, this dog, I come home, and I said, "Oh, I'm not training dogs ever again," and I took a few days off, and I was like, "This is too much for me." So yeah, I think that was a dog that really humbled me, and not because he was probably particularly difficult. He was just big, had really big prey drive, and at that point, he's probably too much dog for me at that stage. So I think he was a dog. I can't remember his name, but Bauble's always a dog that if someone asked me to train, I get a bit of probably.
What was the main takeaway from that? What was the lesson that you learned from that experience?
I mean, it's interesting. I probably, I think probably as the dog a little bit more and have a bit more of an idea of the sheer power that these dogs can have, and taking into it that account rather than just thinking, chuck them a long line on a harness and chuck on some recall and think everything's going to go all right. I think I would have done a lot more, analyzed the prey drive and done a lot of redirection to prey drive on a flip pole and things like that, and worked the dog in that way first and built foundations rather than just. So it was the first session. I bring the dog straight out to prey with doing 10 minutes of practice with some recall, and like, this is going to go well. So, and it didn't go well. So I think those sorts of things humble you and make you realize that you're not all that, and we need to go back and do some more training. So.
What are some of the other lessons that you've learned from mistakes that you've made in the past that someone starting off can avoid the same mistakes from learning from you?
Yeah. I think, look, probably, the biggest thing for me is, not trying to, as when people are first starting training, is you probably want to rush to the result. And it comes back to that foundation is, take your time building, as people say with, good food takes time. I think good training takes time too. And I know that there's obviously always this pressure to get results quickly and all that sort of thing. But I think when you're sort of first starting out, I think you really feel that pressure, and you skip a lot of things. So I think, not skipping the steps is probably a big thing, because I probably had a tendency to do that when I was younger and all that sort of stuff as well. And I guess the other thing when you're first starting out is probably, you don't know what you don't know a lot of the time. And I think everyone when they first start is going to, and I don't know what I don't know now either. But
right.
When you first start out, I think it's very easy to get caught up in it a little bit. So, and better off sometimes taking a step back, or even not being scared to, I still do it now. As I said before, it was only about 3 or 4 weeks ago I referred someone on to another trainer because it's not my specialty. So, don't be scared to bounce off other local trainers in the area that you respect and go, "Hey, like, do you want to take this client?" Because it's not in what, or, what I've done a few times is you might refer on and go, "Hey, do you mind if I attend the session I'm giving this client, to increase my own education and all that sort of stuff. And me and Tegan do that a lot. So so Tegan works for Southern Cross Canine, my company as well. And I've been to her consults. She's been to mine at a few bits and pieces as well, so that we can sort of, learn new things off each other and new approaches, because we both, have, I guess, similar theories, but we do train very differently in a way. So it's good to bounce off other people. So that's probably the big thing that I'd give people, advice. Don't be
Yeah,
scared.
especially when you're still in the early stages of your career. I mean, in the very beginning, any dog that comes to us, we have that ego that we want to take it on. But if there is a dog that does seem too challenging or too aggressive or outside of what you think your current experience level is, I agree. There's nothing wrong and there's no shame of referring that dog to someone else.
Yeah, and that comes back even, as I said recently, like I get people asking about, e-collar work with me, and it's not my thing. So, a lot of the time I'll refer and go, hey, like, I know what you're after it because of this and this. It's not something that I'm that good at. So, I stick to on my lane on that one, especially when it comes to, a lot of livestock worrying and all that sort of stuff. Which you see a lot on farms and things. So it's definitely not my thing, and I'm not afraid to, tell someone that there's probably a better option there. So
Smart. Is there a success story that stands out?
yeah, there's a few actually. I had a look at that question when we spoke about it earlier, and I think for me, there was this one dog. He's still around now. I trained him initially. His name's Bear. He's a lab. And there's a couple of them, but this is probably one that stands out for me. I think mainly stands out not because it was probably anything special, because it was probably one of those sort of first, I guess, big breakthrough dogs that you sort of have when you first start training. So he'd be like 10 years old now, but I saw him when he was sort of 10, 12 months old, and he had a really bad pica issue. So he would eat foreign objects. He had a couple of surgeries, so probably 3 or 4 surgeries by that stage. He'd had bits and pieces taken out of his digestive system because he'd eaten socks and all sorts of things. And we'd done a lot of work as far as, teaching him an outs, teaching him manners around that, and checking, through thinging and swapping it for stuff that he could eat. We taught him a lot of different obedience stuff. And he, from that day that we had that session, never swallowed an object again. And he's still around today. And he was a client. The clients are amazing. They come to training with me for ages, and you can often see him. I see him now, and I'm always just proud of this dog because I often see him walk in the street. I catch up with him every time I see him walking past because his dog knows who I am and gets really excited. But he walks this dog everywhere, like off leash, on a heel. The dog doesn't move anywhere. Walks with him. And they've got a great relationship, and it's sort of one of those, clients that's really, I guess, resonate with me from a long time ago. There's another client, Zena, who's a reactive German Shepherd, and she again come to me when she was really young. And Zena's actually, unfortunately, since passed away not that long ago. But yeah, she went from a dog that they couldn't walk down the street at all, and in the end they come to classes and group classes and went through advanced obedience with us. And yeah, it's a dog that I sort of really had a real soft spot for. I loved that dog, and she was fantastic. You could take her anywhere after that and all that sort of thing. So there's a few of those clients. I think those two in particular, because they were so early on in my training career, sort of resonate with me a lot. Like, obviously there's been a lot of recent stuff and things that have been really rewarding, but probably because of the long term of it, and I've sort of seen those dogs go into old age effectively and had a great life because of the training. Made me you realize why you do it, especially once you get to that 10-year mark that you've been training. A lot of the clients that you train when they're puppies, they're getting old now, so they're 10 years old, and you can sort of see the life that they've had and how it's all turned out. So yeah, it's a lot more rewarding and sad in some ways, because you've known these dogs all their life and you see them moving through their life cycle, but yeah, in other ways it's very nice to see that they've had a really good life because of the training that you've done.
Yeah, and I think success stories are really important. I mean, it's one of the things that as people go out and they look for careers, they look for what path they want to take, often it's finding something that is very rewarding and very fulfilling. And I think being a dog trainer very much so does that. I think it's a very rewarding job when someone comes to you and they say, "This is it. you're this dog's last hope and you're able to turn it around and you give that dog that second chance that the dog deserved. Or someone who's just struggling with some basic issues, but you come in and you help them and they're so relieved by it that it can bring people to tears. I mean, it's a very, very rewarding job. And I'm curious, how has being a dog trainer, or how have you changed after working with dogs over a decade and helping so many owners? Are there things that you've learned from the dogs in the process about patience and communication or life in general that you never expected when you first started out?
Yeah, yeah. I'll sort of answer that in two different ways. I think I've gone through so many phases of different training over the time, and I think I'll continue to. I've been, I've had periods of dog training where I've been really hardcore, I guess, force free. You'd say, like I've gone really force free, and then my sort of thoughts have slightly changed a little bit, and I sort of, found gone somewhere in the middle with sort of how I go about things. So I think on that note, I've sort of mentioned earlier is how I train a dog now is very different to how I trained a dog even 12 months ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago. And it's all sort of changed. And it's funny, sometimes, you go through phases of feeling one way about something and the other.
Mhm.
And I think Spenzi actually talks about that quite a bit, in that she's sort of gone through a lot of different phases of dog training in her life and is sort of, you know, slowly evolving. And I think that's going to be the same with any dog trainer. What was the second part of your question?
How
How
the
that
experiences, so let me see how I phrased it. The experiences that you've had as a dog trainer, how has that shaped you over the years? Like, has it increased? I mean, you talked a little bit about patience earlier. Has it increased the amount of patience that you've had? Has it increased your ability to communicate well, or in life in general, things that being a dog trainer has added that you never would have expected when you first started out?
Yeah, yeah, patience is a big thing. I think when I was doing triathlon before that, I was very just go, 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 and sort of, I was I liked the training component of triathlon when I was doing sport and stuff, but I was a real racer, so I really liked racing, being
Mhm.
competitive and all that sort of stuff. And I think dog training really taught me to enjoy the journey. Like, I sort of got into dog training initially because I was pretty competitive and I, liked the premise of dog sports and things. And I like dog sports and, competing and all that sort of stuff. But I really love the day to day stuff with my dogs. And I think where it sort of taught me a heap of things because, a triathlon did the same thing, but dog training in particular is that, consistency is key, and that sort of, pays off. And with anything in your life, and, I've even related that to my social media stuff, is that consistently posting. A lot of people will start a social media, or they'll start training their dog and they train really hard for 2 months and then they get sick of it and they move on to something else. And it's the same
Mhm.
thing, even people on socials, is they post for ages and they don't get the results and they stop. With anything in life, the people who get the results, people who just keep, knocking at the door. As far as they're consistent, they show up every day. Doesn't have you 10 or 15 minutes a day. You're working, you're training your dog every single day, and doing something with your dog every day, I think, is important because, a lot of people drop the ball after a while because they get sick of it or burnt out or whatever. But I think, yeah, consistency and patience is probably the two big things. And, I used to be a little bit of even a fair weather trainer a little bit, even outside. I'd train my dogs. If it was bad weather, I'd be inside and training my dogs and stuff now. But in a way, actually, dog sports, I've realized that if you train with dog sports people all the time, it could be pouring rain and they're like, I'll see you at 2. They're out there, it's pouring rain, thunder, lightning, or whatever. And, they're out there training. And I think, it's taught me to just get out there no matter what, and train your dog. The dogs don't care if they're out in the rain. Some dogs do, but they, if you get them out there enough, they love it out there. So, you know, consistency, not letting, outside conditions sort of change what you're doing. Keep performing. I think is probably the big thing. So,
Now, you mentioned burnout. Is that something you've dealt with at all since you've been training professionally?
yeah, very much so. I sort of go through phases of being a little bit burnt out. Especially, it depends. You mentioned before that dog training in particular can be really rewarding. And
Mhm.
sometimes it can sort of be, it can be tough on the other end of it
Mhm.
too. without sort of dwelling too much on the negatives, but I guess for people watching who want to become a dog trainer and stuff, it's something to consider. Um,
Absolutely.
Also, with all the positives, there's also, sometimes, I hesitate to call them failures, but there's sort of the things that don't work out. You're training a dog, and I think I'd be lying if I said that every single dog that I've trained has been perfect and come out, the other end with perfect results and all that sort of stuff. That's just not the case. There's been some dogs that I've trained and they've been really hard. We've got a long way, but there's things that I wish I could, do better, because you're working with dogs with, genetics and all that sort of stuff. And I'm not sure whether we'd reach the expectations that we'd want to reach. So, and I think that comes with that, especially when, people tell you, they're your last hope and things like that, that there is some burnout and fatigue or compassion fatigue as far as you really want to help someone, and sometimes it doesn't work out. So, I think that side of things is really quite difficult. And I think sometimes even, you do sessions now and you come back and you're like, oh, am I actually a good trainer? Um, am I as good as I think I am? And I think that's probably the same with any career that people are in, but I think in particular with dog training, it's easy to kind of get in your own head a little bit and go from there. Like I even had, I guess even a few of the seminars I've ran and stuff, you constantly question yourself, and you're like, oh, did I do a good job there, or there's something I wish I did, all that sort of stuff. So I think as far as burnout goes, it can be a tricky profession in that scenario.
Are there any strategies that you use to help prevent or mitigate the burnout from really affecting you? How did you get through it? Because you said you've hit a few of them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty, I guess, pretty resilient. So as far as I just sort of keep putting one foot in front of the other, kind of thing. I think having the right people around you is probably important. Like Bianca, my partner, she's fantastic. I've rang her plenty of times on the way home from from work and training and going, I'm never going to do this again. And she's always the one to not, tell me lies to make me feel better, but put my tires up and tell me, hey, like this is what you've achieved, this is what you've done, and you are a great trainer, and that these things are going to happen. It's part of it. So I think having someone there that you can talk to, whether that be a friend, a training colleague, or something like that, that you can talk to, and actually, because a lot of the time we can get in our own head and only think of the negatives. Where if you look at the big picture, if you look at you train 100 dogs and two of them have not gone the way you planned, that's a 98% success rate, which is pretty bloody good, I'd say. So, there's you're never going to be 100%. And I think, sometimes, everyone has bad days at work and all that sort of stuff, or they're, not feeling it one day and all that sort of stuff. So I think just looking at the context and zooming out, rather than looking at everything from day to day, sometimes is helpful too.
Right. And being around others, like you said, talking to somebody, I think that helps quite a bit. Every time I'm starting to feel a little bit of burnout just by getting involved with the community, doing things like this, going to seminars. I recently went to the Off Leash Canine Summit out here in right outside of Washington, D.C. And that was great. Just being around a bunch of trainers, being there for that event, seeing all the other presentations that the other trainers came down and gave. Stuff like that is what reignites the passion. Or when I signed up for Nino's course, his MVP program, seeing how he works and how he moves with the dogs, that was another moment that kind of sparked that passion back up. Yep. With a lot of new trainers, you talked a little bit earlier about imposter syndrome. And I think that's something that we all deal with. And so new trainers that are struggling with that confidence or the imposter syndrome, how do you gain enough real world experience early on to trust your instincts? And what's the best way for a new trainer to do the same thing?
Yeah. I think, I think there's a quote someone mentioned a long time ago. I can't remember who said it, but I think confidence comes from a lot of undeniable evidence that you've done a good job, kind of thing. So I think putting one foot in front of the other and getting your hands as many dogs as you can and having fun in the process is great for your confidence. I think confidence does come from, I guess a lot of work with dogs. So I think, the big thing is that, especially with that in mind when you're first starting out, is that even understanding that, hey, like, it'll come. We'll keep working and stay humble and all that sort of stuff, and keep networking with other people. I think is a good mindset shift to have. It's the same thing, just not even relating it to dog training. And it's a question I commonly get, when we're working repull on a long line, and people ask me, when do I take my dog off the long line? And I always say, you'll know. And people go, what does that even mean? And the answer is that you'll know in that confidence that you take your dog off the long line comes with lots of undeniable evidence that the dog's going to come back.
Mhm.
And I think if you're about to take the leash off and you don't feel like you can do it, don't do it. You're not ready yet. So, and I think it's somewhat similar to dog training. I think get out there and really commit to working hard and mentoring, getting your hands on as many dogs as you can. I think the confidence comes from that you can then zoom back out and go, hey, like, I'm doing the work type of thing. And that's, I think confidence builds from that rather than, trying to pretend that, your confidence exists. I think it will come. It's just zooming out and knowing that the more dogs you get your hands on, probably the better.
Right. That's part of the evolution of being a dog trainer. Now, you've also been evolving as a dog trainer, you mentioned earlier, and you've carved out this clear identity as a balanced, science-based trainer. How can someone new to the field find their own authentic training voice instead of just copying other trainers?
Yeah. I think being authentic and being yourself is really tricky, but I think
Mhm.
especially online, it can be overwhelming. I think what I've sort of gone through, especially even in real life and in on social media and all that sort of stuff, is that you're going to get people that disagree with you and you're going to get people that agree with you. If you're constantly trying to please everybody and not be authentic, that's when you're going to lose out. Where you're going to build your following as far as locally as a business, when you're going to build your following local, or even internationally as a trainer and all that sort of stuff, is being your authentic self, because the people who are following you are the people that then have the same views as you, and they're going to be your followers that you want. You want people who are in line with you, and sometimes you get people that aren't always all in line with you, but they vibe for whatever reason. But I think if you're not your authentic self, eventually it catches up with you at some point. So I think go out there, have conviction, talk about what you believe in, and I think the rest will sort of follow from there. I think if you try and, I guess, censor yourself in some ways, and look, I always deal with that as well. I mean, I see
Mhm.
a psychologist or a therapist quite regularly. And one of the big things that I always talk to my therapists about is that I want to just be myself. And sometimes that's hard on social media in particular, especially when it comes to dog training. There's a lot of different, I guess, different thoughts, opinions, and things, and it is scary. But every time I've always just tried to be authentic, it's actually come out better in a way. You get people who message you and go, hey, like, I really respect that you've said that, or I really respect that you've put yourself out there with your failures and things like that. Or you've put, I put out a post that I thought I was going to get a lot of slack for. I put up a video of all my trials where my dogs have done like ridiculous stuff. So where some people checked out, completely failed, done things. And I thought, I'd probably get someone saying, oh, I'm not much of a dog trainer or something. And I actually had like 50 messages saying, oh, thanks that you posted that. I wasn't ever actually going to trial because I thought everyone was perfect. Or
Mm.
trainer too, and I'm really scared of posting that sort of stuff. So I'm going to do it now too. And I mentioned Denise Fenzi a few times because I really relate to her. I love her stuff and her theory on everything. She encouraged me about 12 months ago to, she encouraged her audience, and I was watching. I was part of the audience, but she posts up a lot of like live training sessions. And that was scary when I first thought about that. And she said, hey, it's like, it shows accountability, it shows authenticity, and that you're not perfect. And I straight away went home and was like, I'm going to do a live training session on Instagram. And that was scary as, because, most people put on their highlight reels on Instagram and stuff. And,
Yeah.
and that feedback just by putting out a session. And even during the live session, I was doing it right. I'm like, oh, that wasn't very good, but it's all good. You put it up and you'd be surprised at, I guess, the people that then get around you. And that's how you sort of build a sort of loyal following, or a following that that are your people. Because if you're not yourself, you're not going to find your people. And I think that's sort of the key.
And you can always identify an expert because they make difficult things look so easy. And you make training look really easy because you make it fun. For the people who want to bring the same energy to their dogs, where can they go to train with you or see more of your work?
Yeah, so I've got Jamie the dog trainer. That's on Facebook and Instagram. I haven't posted as much as I should on YouTube. I want us to get into the long form content, so I've got a few videos on there. But yeah, if you want to sort of see more long form stuff, I'll sort of start posting on there soon. But yeah, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I have a whole heap of mini tutorials. If you want to train with me, you can just sort of DM me. I do a shadow program that sort of goes for 6 months. I sort of take new students on every 6 months where we sort of go through basically everything I know or everything I can fit into 6 months. And we do little workshops and stuff. So you can do that if you're really interested in training with me. I'm also looking at doing like again, talking about being my sort of authentic self. I was like, hey, if I created a dog training course, what would I make it of? And I was like, hey, like healing and tricks would be like sort of like my thing. So I'm gonna do a little. We're making a little course. It's literally just healing and tricks, nothing else. It's just tricks and fast-paced healing. So if you're sort of interested in doing that sort of stuff, follow my page. So, but yeah, Jamie the dog trainer.
Those are some great resources. We'll make sure we put all the links in the description. And when you do finish that course, make sure you send it to me so I can put that in the description as well. I appreciate you taking the time today, Jamie. It was an absolute pleasure. For everybody else, remember, train smart, laugh often, and 99% of problems vanish once you start training. Thanks again.
Thanks a heap, mate. Appreciate it.